Bond.
My name's Bond.
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 The name's Bond. James Bond.
Can I do something for you, Mr. Bond?
Just a drink. A martini, shaken, not stirred.
James.
Moneypenny, a feast for my eyes.
The legacy of James Bond has spawned more than 50 years. It is the longest-running movie franchise in history and has garnered critical acclaim and Oscar awards while also delivering male-centric action sequences and spy thrills. So what exactly makes the James Bond franchise so desirable? There are many different elements of Bond that we as audience members love to see. James Bond is the ultimate badass. He is suave, classy, and has an appetite for sex appeal. James Bond is a cool, sophisticated, and timeless character. Since writer Ian Fleming wrote Bond, many men over the course of 50 years have fantasized about being James Bond. He goes on secret missions, he has cool gadgets, he gets the women, and he ultimately defeats the bad guys. What guy in the world would not want to be James Bond? Of course, even though the James Bond character is merely a fantasy of men, the appeal of the franchise has also been aimed at women. Many women over the last few decades have always had a fascination with James Bond, as there have been 6 actors that have portrayed him, each signifying their own sexy appeal on the big screen. They say it perfectly in Austin Powers.
Women want him, and men want to be him. Every bit an international man of mystery.
And that's exactly what Bond is. He is a man of mystery, of violence with suave and class, and that makes him the ultimate archetypal hero found in cinema. When breaking down the James Bond movies, what makes them tick is the carefully laid out formula that is present in all the films. You have the Bond babes, the classic and quirky centric villains, the exotic locations, the cool and over-the-top gadgets, the theme songs, and then you have the unrelenting action sequences. Each of these pieces come into play every Bond film, and it's in all of these elements that come together which forms a Bond movie. Without one of these elements, it simply would not be considered a Bond film. It's also important to note that James Bond would never have existed if not for his creator, Ian Fleming. Fleming created the James Bond character, which is somewhat partially based on his life as a spy during World War II. And where did James Bond get his name? Ian Fleming had a book in his study about birdwatching. The author of the book was a man named James Bond. According to Fleming, he wanted Bond to have a regular, average-sounding name that seemed bland. It worked, however, because now it's a household name that people all over the world recognize. In celebration of Bond, we are going to explore the greatest moments in the Bond franchise and why they made our list of the most influential scenes of Bond history. Starting at number 10, GoldenEye. What makes this Bond movie special was that it introduced 007 into the 90s, in a post-Cold War era with actor Pierce Brosnan taking the lead. But why this is in the list is because of the incredible tank sequence that takes place in St. Petersburg, Russia. This was the most expensive sequence of the Bond films at that time, and visually was just stunning to look at, marking Brosnan's first outing as Bond as a refreshing success. Number 9. Skyfall. Skyfall wasn't only the highest and most successful Bond film to date, but it also was the most dramatic. Bond's past comes back to haunt him, which leads him to an old familiar place, his childhood home. The Battle of the Bond estate is incredibly thrilling, featuring a glorious return for the Aston Martin DB5, and we get a glimpse into Bond's childhood as he wanders the desolate halls of his parents' house. The action in this scene is top-notch, and what better way to leave behind your home than blowing it up? This is one element of Bond's past that he wants to stay dead, and by the end of the film, his home is 6 feet under. Number 8. Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die was Roger Moore's first outing as the secret agent, and it is arguably his best. Featuring the weird voodoo elements of New Orleans and the Southern Bayou, this was one Bond film that explored uncharted territory, and Roger Moore cemented his version of Bond with this excellent outing. One of the best sequences of the film that sets the tone for the rest of the story is the very first scene, where a funeral procession is parading through the streets. The Fillet of Souls is a cover for the notorious crime boss Kananga and his evil villainous schemes. The Fillet of Souls procession is one disturbing opening scene in Bond history that we will never forget.
Whose funeral is it? Yours.
Number 7. On Her Majesty's Secret Service. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was the first Bond outing without Sean Connery. Actor George Lazenby played Bond for this one solo film without much success. Even though audiences didn't respond to him as Bond, the film itself was a hidden winner. And what makes this Bond film so significant is the fact that Bond marries Babe Contessa Teresa de Vincenzo. Yes, that's right. James Bond finally tied the knot. And although we cheered at the end for their unification of love, their unity was short-lived. The death of Bond's first and only wife was a somber way to end a Bond film and made the story compelling and dramatic.
It's all right. It's quite all right, really. She's having a rest. We'll be going on soon. There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world.
Number 6. You Only Live Twice. From the beginning Bond films, a secret criminal organization had been behind many of the evil plots that Bond stopped, leading him to discover Spectre, which in turn stands for Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. And who could lead such an evil empire but the bald man himself, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Blofeld is the arch nemesis of Bond and appears in multiple films throughout the series. He is dripping with evil and is recognizable for his bald head and furry white cat.
I am Ernst Stavro Blofeld. They told me you were assassinated in Hong Kong.
Yes, this is my second life.
You only live twice, Mr. Bond.
And with the release of Spectre this November, we could see the return of everyone's favorite Bond villain. Number 5. Thunderball. Thunderball was the fourth outing for Sean Connery as Bond, and contains one of the most iconic scenes in the Bond franchise. From number 2's Emilio Largo to the exotic Caribbean locations, beaches, and sharks, this is a Bond film for the ages. And the best sequence in Thunderball is the underwater battle sequence at the end of the film, all set beautifully to the score by John Barry. Thunderball was a huge success for the franchise and delivers on all the thrills of a James Bond film. Number 4. Goldfinger. What makes James Bond iconic is the fact that he gets himself into sticky situations and his gadgets help him get out of them. The relationship with Bond and Q, the quartermaster, is standard Bond formula as Q creates these gadgets for Bond's professional pleasure. And the most memorable of all of them is the Aston Martin DB5. With a bulletproof smokescreen and frontal machine guns, this is one car on every man's fantasy list. But what's even cooler is the passenger seat.
Here. Now, if you take the top off, you'll find a little red button. Whatever you do, don't touch it.
No, why not?
Because you'll release this section of the roof and engage and fire the passenger ejector seat. Whoosh.
Ejector seat? You're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
When Bond finally uses the car, we see his side seat henchman take a lift after Bond pushes the little red button that he originally is told not to push. Number 3. Casino Royale. Casino Royale introduced Bond in a post-9/11 world. Blonde actor Daniel Craig was the new iteration of Bond, in which many people were up in arms over the casting choice. But once they saw the opening scene, their tunes dramatically changed. This was the first Bond film to not directly open with the famous gun barrel sequence, as this film serves as a prequel story about how Bond got his license to kill. In the greatest Bond opening of all time, we not only see Bond lurking in the shadows, but we see him as half monk, half hitman, exposing a character named Dryden for selling military secrets. Bond eliminates both men on his mission, and we see him become the character that we all know and love, which finally segues into the classic gun barrel sequence from the previous films. The black and white filter is beautifully used and stamped Daniel Craig as being the best Bond since Sean Connery.
Made you feel it, did he? Well, you needn't worry. The second is...
Yes. Considerably.
Number 2. Goldfinger. Goldfinger is considered by many to be the greatest Bond film of all time. The locations, the classic villains, to the gadgets, each element is fully present. And one of the most iconic scenes in Bond history comes when the villain, Auric Goldfinger, has strapped Bond to a table and a laser beam attempts to cut Bond in half. What follows is the famous and iconic line in cinema.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Goldfinger is the quintessential Bond film, and for good reason. And Sean Connery's version of Bond will always be remembered. Number 1. Dr. No. Dr. No was the very first Bond film which sets the tone for all incarnations of the following Bonds. Sean Connery was introduced as the suave but deadly spy, whom men have been trying to emulate ever since. But the most iconic scene in Bond history takes place off of Crab Key, Dr. No's secluded island. Bond wakes up to a heavenly voice as the Bond girl Honey Rider emerges from the ocean wearing the classic white bikini, with a knife strapped to her side. This scene has forever been cemented into Bond history as well as cinema. It is the ultimate fantasy sequence and forever remains immortal in the James Bond canon.
Who is that?
It's all right. I'm not supposed to be here either. I take it you're not. Are you alone?
What are you doing here? Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking.
Stay where you are.
I promise I won't steal your shells.
I promise you won't either. Stay where you are.
I can assure you my intentions are strictly honorable.
In 50 years, the Bond films have covered more grounds than any other films in history. They encapsulate action, romance, drama, horror, and fantasy. The exotic locations and characters make Bond the ultimate gentleman of spy. There is a reason this franchise has lasted so long and will continue to do so. The James Bond franchise has made an impact on the world and in pop culture. And as long as the audience craves more women, more exotic fight scenes, and slick spy fodder, then you can bet that James Bond will always return.
It was me, James.
The author of all your pain.